Fethering is on the south coast, not far from Tarring. Though calling itself a village, it isn't what that word immediately brings to the minds of people nostalgic for an idealised, simpler England. Despite the presence of many components of a village, one church, one shop, one pub, one petrol station, and a whole bunch of people who reckon they're the squire, Fethering is in fact quite a large residential conurbation. The core is its high street, some of whose flint-faced cottages date back to the early 18th century. Outwards, during the last century and a half, have spread wave after wave of new developments. Set at the mouth of the Feather, the village boasts a cluster of seafront cafes and a small but tasteful amusements arcade. A sea wall abuts the Fethering Yacht Club. Only yacht club members, and some local fishermen who keep their blue-painted equipment boxes there, are allowed the precious keys which give access to this area. Fethering is its own little world of double-glazed windows and double-glazed minds. Carole Seddon had always planned to retire there. The cottage had been bought as a weekend retreat when she had both a job and a husband, and though she now had neither, she never regretted the investment. Carole had enjoyed working for the Home Office. Her civil service pension was at the generous end of adequate. The mortgage was paid off. She did not expect any changes in the rest of her life. She had had her steel-grey hair cut sensibly short, and protected her pale blue eyes with rimless glasses, which she hoped were insufficiently fashionable ever to look dated. She had acquired a sensible new Renault and a dog called Gulliver, who was as sensible as a Labrador is capable of being. If her clothes were older than those usually worn by a woman in her early 50s, they represented sensible planning for the future. And someone who wished to slip imperceptibly into old age could not have chosen a better environment than Fethering in which to complete the process. As she took her regular walk on the beach that Tuesday morning in early November, Carole's thoughts centred round the woman who, the previous day, had taken possession of the house next door. It was called Woodside Cottage, though there wasn't a wood in sight. But then Carole's own house was called High Tor, and it was a good 200 miles to the nearest one of those. She hadn't spoken to the newcomer yet. Her name was Jude. Carole's lips shaped the monosyllable with slight distaste. Jude had about it an over-casual air, a studied informality. Carole Seddon had never before had a friend called Jude, and she wasn't about to start now. She was shaken out of these sour thoughts by Gulliver's bark. The dog was down near the water's scummy edge, running round a bulky figure who was walking across the flat grey sand towards Carole. The figure was hunched against the wind into a shiny green anorak. Then, with an averted face, he, or she, deliberately changed course and broke into a lumbering, almost panicky run up the steep shingle towards the yacht club. Meanwhile, Gulliver had disappeared round the corner of a breakwater. Once again, he was barking furiously. Carole wondered what it would be this time. A crushed plastic bottle or a scrap of punctured beach ball could suddenly, to his eyes, be transformed into a major threat to world peace. But that morning it wasn't a bottle or a scrap of beach ball that had set Gulliver off. As Carole Seddon saw when she rounded the end of the breakwater, it was a dead body. He was maybe in his 50s, though his pallor made it difficult to tell. The flesh of his face, framed by matted greying hair and the sharp stubble of a 3-day beard, was bleached the pale beige of driftwood. His eyes were closed. His mouth, though, hung open. To the right of the bottom jaw a tooth was missing. It had been missing a long time. His clothes, jeans and a grey jumper, were soaked heavy. Laced round his upper body was an orange life jacket, stamped in faded black letters, property of Fethering Yacht Club. Any theory that the man had been the victim of a sailing accident was belied by the 2 wounds in his neck. Washed blood-free by the sea, they were thin, like the lines of a butcher's cleaver in dead meat, exposing the darker flesh beneath. Never for a moment did it occur to Carole Seddon that the man was not dead. She felt no urge to kneel by the body and feel for pulses. It wasn't just squeamishness. There was no point. Anyway, it was better to leave the corpse undisturbed for the police to examine. She started resolutely up the beach, Gulliver trotting maturely at her side. It was still only 7:30 when they got back to High Tor. Carole bathed the dog, splashing him down with a hose outside the back door. Well, she knew if she didn't, the house would smell of rotting seaweed for weeks. When the dog was clean and shining and snuffling into sleep by the Aga, it seemed natural for her to continue cleaning the kitchen. As a result, it was after 9 before she dialed 999 and asked for the police. In simple, unemotional sentences, she gave them the necessary information. She pinpointed the exact position of the body and gave her considered estimate as to how long it would be before the incoming tide reached the point. She gave her address and telephone number and was told that someone would be round to talk to her. She put the phone down and sat in an armchair. And then she heard the strange noise from outside. It was a rhythmic, dull thudding, something being hit repeatedly. Rising, she saw through the window her neighbour Jude in the adjacent front garden. Wearing her trademark long skirt and a bright yellow T-shirt, Jude was beating a slightly threadbare rug with a flat besom brush. Her large bosom and chubby arms shuddered with the effort. Momentarily, Jude turned and caught sight of her neighbour framed in the window. For Carole to have repressed a half-smile and little flap of her hand would have been the height of bad manners. Her minimal gesture was reciprocated by a huge wave and a cheery grin. Carole found her hand and face doing a little mime of, "I'll come out and say hello." "My name's Carole Seddon. Welcome to Fethering. If there's anything I can do to help out, please don't hesitate to tell me." "Thanks very much." Carole found her hand grasped and firmly shaken. "My name's Jude." "Yes." Carole awaited the gloss of a surname, but wasn't given one. "You'll find we're a friendly lot round here," she lied. Carole found the openness of Jude's dreamy brown eyes slightly disconcerting. "Anyway," she shook herself back on track, "better get on. Things to do." Jude grinned. "Me too. House is crammed full of boxes. God knows how long it'll take me to sort it all out. See you soon, then." "Yes," said Carole, turning in slight confusion back towards her front door. Inside the house, she berated herself for how little solid fact she'd got out of the conversation. She wasn't that interested, of course, but there were things one ought to know about a new neighbour. "So, why were you walking on that part of the beach, Mrs. Seddon?" Carole didn't like Detective Inspector Brayfield's tone. She'd reported the body after all. If anything, she deserved congratulation. Certainly not this hint of suspicion in her interrogator's voice. Also, why were there 2 of them? Not just the inspector, but the uniformed WPC juster, who hadn't said much but was clearly taking everything in. Was there some new directive that the police always had to work in 2s, even for routine inquiries? "I always go for an early morning walk along the beach," said Carole. "I have a dog, and I always take my dog on the beach first thing." "First thing was rather early this morning, wasn't it, Mrs. Seddon? Can hardly have been light when you set off." "I woke early. It always takes me a bit of time to adjust when the clocks change." "I understand," said the inspector, who clearly didn't. "So why did you go to that particular part of the beach this morning?" "It wasn't a particular part of the beach. It was just where I happened to be walking." Exasperated by the scepticism in Detective Inspector Brayfield's eye, Carole went on, "There are only 2 directions in which you can go along the beach. Off Seaview Road, there's a path which goes down by the yacht club. At the end of that, you're on the beach, and you have the choice of turning left or turning right. Left, you go virtually straight into the sea wall. So this morning, like most mornings, I decided to turn right." She didn't mean to sound sarcastic, but knew that's how the words were coming out. "For any particular reason?" "No," Carole snapped, "for no particular reason." "Are you sure you're all right?" It was WPC Juster this time. "Yes, I'm quite all right, thank you." Why were they treating her like some semi-invalid? "How old are you, Mrs. Seddon?" Juster went on. I don't see that it's any business of yours, but I'm 53. "Oh," said the WPC. "Ah," the inspector echoed, as if that explained everything. What was this? Some kind of medical assessment? What were they trying to insinuate? "Was there anyone else around on the beach this morning when you took your walk?" "Apart from the dead body?" "Apart, indeed, from the dead body. Do you recall seeing anyone?" "No, I don't think I did." "Oh, yes, there was someone. Someone in a shiny green anorak with a hood tied up. Well, they were walking into the wind, you see. They hurried straight past me, almost ran." "Uh-huh. Was it a man or a woman?" "I couldn't tell." "Really? You didn't speak to this person?" "No, I just gave them a nod, I think." "And did they speak to you?" "No." "Or give you a nod?" Carole shook her head. "That's a pity, isn't it?" "Why?" "Well, obviously, if we had any means of tracking down this other person on the beach, then we might have another witness of your dead body, mightn't we?" The inspector ran a hand over his chin, as if checking the quality of his morning shave. "You don't often find dead bodies on the beach, do you, Mrs. Seddon?" "No, of course I don't." "So, given that it's an unusual and probably rather a shocking thing to happen to you, can you understand why I'm surprised that you bathed your dog and did some of your housework before reporting it?" Carole shrugged. "Maybe I was in shock. Maybe I needed to do something mechanical, something mundane to calm myself down." "Or maybe, Mrs. Seddon, you just needed time to work things out." "Work what out?" "What you were going to say when you rang the police." "I didn't need to work that out. I just had to say exactly what I'd seen." "The body on the beach." "Precisely." "And to direct us to where that body was lying?" "Yes." "Well," said the inspector, "everything you've told us this morning makes perfect sense." "I'm glad to hear it." "We followed your directions to the letter. They were very clear." Carole nodded in acknowledgement of the compliment. "We went down to the breakwater you described, and everything was absolutely fine. Except for one small detail." "And what was that?" "When we got to the breakwater, there was nothing there. There was no body on the beach, Mrs. Seddon." Carole Seddon felt upset after the police's departure. They had come to the house with an agenda. Their semaphore of little nods and eyelid flickers had been prearranged. Having arrived believing her to be an hysterical attention-seeker, nothing she could say was going to make them leave with any change in their attitude. That's what hurt, that they'd thought her anything less than sensible. There was no doubt that she had seen the body on the beach. Maybe the police had taken too long, arriving after the tide had come in far enough to move the body on. Maybe someone had moved it deliberately. Her thoughts were interrupted when the doorbell rang. She answered it, and was surprised to find herself confronted by a thin, haunted-looking woman she had never seen before. "Did you find a body on the beach this morning?" Now Carole knew why she had let the woman in. Something in her eyes had indicated that her visit was serious. "What makes you think I did?" "I know you did." The voice was uneducated South Coast, not from the more discriminating purlieus of Fethering.
It was a woman with a beige raincoat and a Labrador. You fit the description.
Whose description?
Look, I know it was you, so we can cut out the bullshit.
Carole Seddon appraised the woman in front of her. The face had about it a deadness, the texture and colour of papier-mâché. The hair was flat and dull like tobacco. Only the eyes were alive, burning with a desperate energy. "The police have been to see me this morning," said Carole evenly. "According to them, when they looked, there was no body on the beach."
"I'm not interested in the police. You and I know there was a body on the beach this morning, down at the end of the breakwater."
"Were you watching me?" asked Carole. "Was it you who I saw walking away from the body?"
"I didn't go on the beach this morning."
The woman dismissed these irrelevant details and hurried on to what really concerned her.
"Did you take something from the body? Something out of his jacket pocket?"
"No, I certainly didn't. I didn't touch it."
"Are you sure?"
"Of course I'm sure."
"There was no knife?"
"Knife? I didn't see any knife." This answer seemed to provide a moment of reassurance. Eventually the woman asked,
"Do you know where it went?"
"The body? I've no idea."
"And after you seen it, did you see anyone else go near it?"
"No. As I've told you, I went straight home and rang the police."
"'Cause if you're lying, and I find out you snitched to anyone about what you've seen, there'll be trouble."
There was a new, sly menace in the woman's voice, and as she spoke, she reached inside her quilted anorak and pulled out a gun. Carole was too affronted to feel any fear. "Put that thing away," she ordered. "What on earth do you think you're doing? This is Fethering, not Miami Beach." The woman waved the gun threateningly.
"So, tell me what you did see."
"I didn't see anything other than what I've told you about." The gun was still pointing straight at her, and a new, dangerous focus had come into the woman's eyes when the front doorbell rang. The woman hissed,
"Don't answer it!"
"But everyone knows I'm here. If I don't answer it, they'll get suspicious and call the police." The barrel wavered while the woman weighed this up. Then she relented.
"See who it is. Don't invite them in, though."
Carole went to open the front door. In the cone of light spreading from the overhead lamp stood Jude. Her blonde hair was covered by a floppy hat, and she appeared to be wearing some kind of poncho. "Carole, hi. I wondered whether you'd fancy going down to the Crown and Anchor for a drink." Before Carole had time to reply, there was the clatter of a door behind her. Carole rushed back to find her sitting room empty. The sound of the back door slamming shut drew her through to the kitchen. That, too, was empty. From his position at the foot of the Aga, Gulliver looked up blearily. A real help he was. She moved to the window and peered into the darkness. There was no sign of the woman, but the gate at the end of the garden flapped open. Carole turned back to see Jude framed in the kitchen doorway. "So what about a drink?" Jude asked casually. To her surprise, Carole found her lips forming the words, Yes, what a good idea." Carole hadn't been in the Crown and Anchor since the new management took over nearly 3 years ago. Ted Crisp had arrived with a reputation, and since his arrival in the village it had been amplified by local gossip. Every now and then he was said to go on major benders, and reports of his behaviour towards women were also exchanged in hushed voices. Jude, however, was undeterred. "I'll get these," she said, gesturing Carole to a table and bustling up to the bar. "How are you then, young Jude?" Ted Crisp asked, with what Carole categorised as a lecherous leer. "Oh, not so bad, Ted. 2 white wines, please." "Large ones?" "Oh, yes." As Jude waited, Carole heard a roar of raucous laughter from the bar. Ted Crisp had just made a joke which seemed to amuse both Jude and the man slumped on a bar stool beside her. His grey hair was thinning, and the way he attacked his large scotch suggested it wasn't his first of the evening. Now she could see his half-turned face. Carole knew who the man was. Rory Turnbull, dentist with a practice in Brighton. Lived with a sour-faced wife in one of those huge houses on the Shawlands estate. "Don't waste time with the eating," he was saying. "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die." There was a change of tone in his last words, as if he was suddenly aware of their meaning. Jude came back from the bar, cradling the 2 large glasses of wine and 2 packets of crisps. Carole took a long swallow of wine. "Oh, you look as if you could do with that," said Jude. "I mean, you look like you've had a bit of a shock." "Well, yes, I suppose I have," Carole found herself saying. Jude didn't ask any question, she offered no prompt, and yet Carole found herself ineluctably drawn to further revelation. "The fact is," she said. And it all came out. The body, the interview with the police, the woman who'd arrived on her doorstep earlier that evening, the gun. At last Jude spoke. "You say the woman looked as if she was on drugs? I should think drugs are behind the whole thing." "What do you mean?" "Well, there's a long tradition of smuggling on the south coast, and once it was brandy, silks and tobacco. Now it's cannabis, cocaine and heroin." Carole smiled. "You seem to know a lot about the subject." Suddenly the pub door clattered open, making both the women look up. The newcomer was a short man of about 70. The dark blue reefer jacket and neat corduroy cap bestowed a deliberately naval air. A wispy white beard on the point of his chin gave his head the shape of some root vegetable newly plucked from the soil. "Evening, mine host," he said as he strode towards the bar. Carole recognised Bill Chilcott, another High Street resident. "Evening, Bill." Ted Crisp reached for the pump handle. "Your customary half?" "Yes, thank you. And my customary half-hour away from the little woman." Huh. He chuckled and then turned to the other man at the bar. "Rory, how you doing? I hear there've been more break-ins at the yacht club." "Have there?" Rory Turnbull looked shocked. "Who'd you hear that from?" asked Ted. "The Vice-Commodore." "That old idiot!" Bill Chilcott's tuber face turned purple with anger. "No, it was something Sandra heard on the grapevine, from one of her regular swimming group at the leisure centre. If you want my opinion—" But on this occasion the Crown and Anchor was spared another of Bill Chilcott's opinions. Rory Turnbull's stool had clattered against the counter as he rose to leave. "Better be off," he announced brusquely. "Back to the lovely Barbara, eh?" said Ted Crisp. "Yes, back to the lovely Barbara," the dentist echoed in a doom-laden voice. Carole looked down at their empty wine-glasses. "Oh, think we need another of those," declared Jude, rising to her feet. "No, I'll get them," Carole said, a little late, following Jude to the bar. The outer door clattered shut behind Rory Turnbull. "Wouldn't like to be his first appointment in the morning," Ted Crisp observed. "Why, what's he do?" asked Jude. "Dentist. But if you take my advice, go for one with a steadier hand." Ted Crisp chuckled. "Oh, sorry, Bill. I should have introduced you. You know Carole, don't you? Well, this is Jude, who's just moved into the High Street, too. 2 more large white wines, is it, ladies?" "Yes," replied Jude, and Carole didn't even feel the slightest instinct to ask for a small one. "Rory Turnbull," Jude mused. "And you said his wife's name's Barbara?" "That's right," said Bill Chilcott. "Why, do you know her?" "No, just that I had a card through the letterbox yesterday from a Barbara Turnbull, asking me to go to some coffee morning tomorrow, as a new resident of Fethering. Something to do with All Saints." "Well," said Bill, "you'll have the pleasure of meeting my wife Sandra there, too. She'll be going after a swim." "Oh, good." "Barbara Turnbull's very active in the church locally. She and her mother Winnie very devout." "That's probably what drives old Rory in here," said Ted. "Needs to swill out the odour of sanctity with a few large ones." As they settled back at the table with their refilled glasses, Carole realised she'd been given a good cue to find out more about her neighbour. She asked, "Are you religious?" Jude let out a warm chuckle. "Depends what you mean by religious." "Well, church-going." The chuckle expanded into laughter. "Good heavens, no." Having elicited one small piece of information, Carole pressed her advantage. "I don't know anything about you, actually, Jude." She managed to say the name with only a vestigial hint of quotation marks around it. "Are you married?" "Not at the moment. What about you?" "Have been. Divorced." Carole still had a slight pang when she said the word. It wasn't that she regretted the loss of her married status, or that she wished David was still around, very much the opposite. She knew she was much better off without him. But being divorced still seemed to her to carry an overtone of failure. "How long ago?" asked Jude. "Oh, 10 years now. No, 12. How time flies." "Any children?" "One son, Stephen. He's nearly 30. I don't see a lot of him. What about you?" Jude looked at her watch, seeming not to hear the question. "I'm really starving," she said. "I've got to order something to eat. Are you sure you're not going to?" "Well," said Carole. They both ended up ordering fish and chips. By then, Bill Chilcot, having made his customary half of bitter last exactly his customary half an hour, had left the pub with a hearty "Cheerio, mine host." The two women's conversation for the rest of the evening moved away from their personal details. Jude was intrigued by the two dramatic events of the day, and kept returning to the body on the beach and the woman with the gun, offering ever new conjectures to explain them. Carole's recollections of the end of the evening were a little hazy. Of course, it wasn't just the alcohol. It was her shocked emotional state that had made her exceptionally susceptible to its effects. She comforted herself with this thought as she slipped into stupefied sleep. The other thought in her mind was a recollection of something her new neighbour had said. Carole couldn't remember the exact words, but she felt sure that Jude had suggested their working together. If the police weren't going to show any interest in doing it, then the two of them should find out who killed the body on the beach. Jude found the Shorlands estate rather spooky as she walked through on the way to Barbara Turnbull's coffee morning. Though laid out spaciously, the predominant feeling it gave her was one of claustrophobia, and the 20 mph speed signs and crime alert in operation notices gave her the feeling of being under surveillance.
"Ah, hello. You must be the new owner of Woodside Cottage. I'm Barbara Turnbull."
The house into which Jude was admitted had recently been improved by an expensive interior designer. But to Jude, the interior of Brigadoon had all the homely charm of an intensive care unit. Barbara Turnbull was in her 50s, and one of those women who'd spread sideways. Her hair, dyed a copper beech colour, had recently been cut short. She wore a broad green skirt and little matching waistcoat over a blouse with an ivy design. There were a lot of rings on her hands. In the large sitting room, she introduced Jude to about a dozen women, whose average age was well over 60.
"And this is my mother, Winnie Norton. Why don't you sit and have a chat, Jude, while I get you some coffee?"
Winnie Norton wore a tweed suit whose predominant colour was turquoise. There were even more rings on her hands than on her daughter's, but they hung loosely on the thin talons.
"So, how do you like Fethering?" she asked.
"Seems fine, so far," said Jude.
"Have you lived here long, Mrs. Norton?" "All my life in the area, yes."
"But not all that time here at Shorlands?"
"Oh, I don't live on the estate, no. I sold the big house after my husband died, and bought one of those new flats near the yacht club. Spray Lodge, do you know what I mean?"
"Sorry," said Jude, "I'm still getting my bearings."
"It's a very nice block. The residents do have a degree of control over who moves in. Well, you have to these days, don't you? All kinds of people have got the money to move into somewhere like Fethering now."
"Yes," said Jude. "So, do you have any grandchildren, Mrs. Norton?"
"No, Barbara and Rory didn't want children. Rory does very well," his mother-in-law went on, Of course, he never really was our sort, but Barbara's done wonders with him.
Jude began to understand why Rory Turnbull needed his intravenous drip of whisky down at the Crown and Anchor. Barbara Turnbull returned with the promised coffee.
"Now you mustn't monopolise our guest, Mummy. Do let me introduce you to some other people, Jude."
With the newcomer in her wake, she bore down on a bird-like woman with spiky hair, who turned out to be Sandra Chilcott.
"Jude, of course, I've heard all about you from Bill."
She smiled coyly.
"Didn't take you long to find your way to the Crown and Anchor, did it?"
The woman beside Sandra asked, "So, have you come down to Fethering in search of the quiet life?"
Sandra took her cue. "If so, I'm not sure you've come to the right place. You'll find quite a lot of exciting things happen in Fethering."
"Really?" said Jude.
"Oh, yes. For example, this morning a dead body was found on the beach."
"You were right, Carole," said Jude. "There was a body on the beach. I met Bill Chilcott's wife Sandra at Barbara Turnbull's, and she'd heard about it on local radio."
"Yes," said Carole. "I heard it too. Everyone was talking about it at the supermarket."
They were standing, rather awkwardly, on Carole's doorstep. "Well," said Jude at last, "there's bound to be something about it on the local news at lunchtime. Let's go and watch it at my place." "What? I'll knock up something for lunch, and we can open a bottle of wine. Come on." As the set came to life, Carole took in the crammed contents of the room. Carved African animals jostled with brass handbells. Eggs of exotically veined stone lay beside Russian dolls and spinners' bobbins. "Do sit down," said Jude, bustling in from the kitchen with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. The local news had just started. A gauche female newsreader was saying, "A body was found on the beach at Fethering this morning by a woman walking her dog." "Only 1 day late," Jude chuckled. "The body," the newsreader droned on, "has been identified as that of 16-year-old... Carole's jaw dropped. "Aaron Spaulding." A picture of the dead boy filled the screen. With his floppy blonde fringe and cheekily crooked grin, he looked nearer 12 than 16. The newsreader's voice continued drably, "He lived in Fethering and had been missing for the past 24 hours. The cause of death has not yet been established, but the police have not ruled out foul play." The 2 women looked at one another in amazement.
"But it was a middle-aged man, the body I saw. No way could it have been mistaken for a teenager."
"It wasn't mistaken for a teenager," Jude said firmly. "Obviously, there have been 2 bodies on the beach." "You don't think there's any connection between them, do you?" Jude cocked her head thoughtfully to one side. "There's no reason why there should be, but my instinct says there is. Look, I'll get us some lunch, then we can start. What information do we currently have about your body on the beach?" Carole shrugged. "Only that he was wearing a life jacket that was printed property of Fethering Yacht Club." Jude clapped her hands gleefully. "Then it seems pretty obvious to me that the first thing we should do is go down to Fethering Yacht Club. We can say we saw some kids playing with one of their life jackets."
"But we can't do that,"
Carole objected. "Why not?"
"Because we're not members." "Oh, for heaven's sake,"
said Jude. Soon the 2 women were striding along the high path beside the banks of the Feather towards the yacht club. It was low tide, and in the distance they could hear the rhythmic thumping of a tall pile-driving machine as it forced metal sheets down into the mud. "Repairs to the sea wall," Carole explained.
"What a day for them to start."
Rows of dinghies on trailers were regimented in front of the clubhouse building, all zipped up to the necks of their masts in sturdy fitted covers. Dennis Woodville, the vice-commodore of the yacht club, let them in. He was a tall, angular man with a beaky nose and the sagging, papery skin of a heavy smoker. "Wouldn't surprise me at all if they nicked one of our life jackets," he said after Jude had glibly produced her lie. "A lot of bloody kids always trying to break into this place, and into the boats. He gestured outside. "Are there a lot of members?" asked Jude.
"Couple of 100. Not all very active. We tend to be careful what kind of people we let in. Open the doors too wide and you can end up with all kinds of riff-raff."
"And it's all run by volunteers?" asked Carole.
"We club officials give our services free. Obviously, expenses taken when required by the treasurer, and so on. That's Rory Turnbull, dentist chap. He's got problems at the moment. Club accounts don't tally, I'm afraid. It's a bloody accountant's cock-up. Of course, we pay the casual workers, cleaners, bar staff. Except we haven't any at the moment. Tanya finished today. Did you know her? Large girl with this great industrial rivet punched through her nose. Suddenly reckoned the place was too far from Brighton, so she's going to look for something closer to home. Would either of you like a drink, by the way?"
"No, thank you," said Carole firmly, before Jude could lead her further astray.
"Anyway, I think I'd better be closing up for the afternoon, so if you'll excuse me."
Carole and Jude stood up. "By the way," said Jude, "did you hear about that poor boy who drowned, Vice-Commodore?"
"What? Oh, yes, of course I did. Another feathering floater."
"Sorry? What does that mean?"
"Bit of local folklore, I suppose. Tide here moves pretty damn fast. Anyone who's so unfortunate as to fall into the feather, or so damn stupid as to jump into it, some cross-current gets them, and they usually turn up on Fethering Beach within 24 hours. They go feathering floaters. Nice to have a few local traditions, eh?"
Outside, the weather had, if anything, worsened.
"I wish you'd tell me what we're doing,"
Carole complained. "We're going back to where you found the body on the beach," said Jude firmly. "The water's far enough out for us to see."
"But the tide has washed over the area a good few times by now."
"That's not the point." Eventually, they were standing at the foot of the breakwater. Out of sight now in the encroaching darkness, the relentless thudding of the pile-driver continued, eerily echoing off the sea. Jude looked at the water-filled indentation, at the foot of the breakwater's worn stanchions. It was here.
"Yes, exactly here."
"Well, there's no way the body was swept out to sea again. If the incoming tide was going to move him at all, it'd move him further up the beach. He wouldn't be swept out till after the tide had changed. And the police came to see you too soon after they hadn't found the body for that to have happened. So—" Jude spun on her booted heel and looked round the semicircle towards the village. She stopped, facing Fethering Yacht Club. "I think we go back up there again." It was nearly dark by the time they got back to the side gate to the yacht club. Jude looked round but could see no one in the enveloping gloom.
"OK, give me a leg up."
When they were both inside the compound, she said,
"Now, let's have a look at all of these boats." "What are we looking for?"
"A loose cover. A sign that one of them's been broken into. You think the body might have been hidden in one of these boats?" The two women began to feel their way along the rows of dinghies. Above them, the wind sang in rigging, and steel halyards clattered endlessly against metal masts.
"Could be something here,"
Carole called out, pointing to the rim of a boat cover where a piece of rope dangled loose. She reached into her Burberry pocket for her torch, and a beam of light was quickly focused on the trailing rope. Freeing a corner of the cover, Jude flipped it back from the stern of the boat. The thin stream of light picked out a name in gold lettering. Brigadoon 2. "I wonder," said Jude, "do you think there's a kind of person who would give their boat the same name as their house?" "Oh, come on, let's get the rest of this cover off and have a look inside." They found no body, just the moulded fiberglass interior of a dinghy's hull. In the central channel, a rectangle of trapped water gleamed against the torchlight. Its surface was frozen hard. "Let's just check if there's anything under that water," said Carole. With surprising ease, Jude hoisted herself over the side and into the dinghy. With a gloved fist, she hammered through the ice and reached down into the fetid water. "Look at this," she said triumphantly. It was a large, robust Stanley knife, clicked in the open position. The torchlight gleamed on the shiny triangle of its blade. "Wonder how long that's been there." "Not very long," said Carole. "Blade like that would rust very quickly. And the woman who drew a gun on me wanted to know if I'd found a knife." Jude slowly turned the knife over in her hand. On the other side of the handle, words had been printed in uneven white paint strokes. They read, J.T. Carpets. "So, what have we got?" asked Jude. They were back in Carole's house, sitting in front of her log-effect gas fire. "We've got the knife," said Carole, "but whether it has any relevance to the body on the beach, we just don't know, do we?" "If we assumed it did," said Jude, "would that help?" "It depends what it had to do with the body." "Well, your woman with the gun actually mentioned a knife. Suppose it belonged to the dead man, that it dropped out of his pocket while he was hidden away in the boat." "All right," said Carole. "Assuming the body was hidden in the boat after I found it, that raises other questions." "Like who hid it there?" said Jude, "and more to the point, who removed it from the boat before we looked under the cover this afternoon?" "And," said Carole, "the only clue we have to help us answer these questions is the Stanley knife." "Which might have belonged to the dead man, or to whoever left the body there." "Or might have belonged to anyone else in the world," Carole couldn't help saying. Jude's brows wrinkled, and she twirled a tendril of blonde hair thoughtfully between finger and thumb. "I suppose, in fact, the most likely person to have dropped the knife is the boat's owner." "Who might be Rory Turnbull," said Carole, "assuming we go along with the theory that he would give the same name to his boat as his house. Easy enough to ask our friend, the Vice-Commodore." Jude dragged herself back to reality. "Alternatively, I haven't registered with a dentist down here yet. Now I've met Barbara Turnbull and her mother, I'd like to know more about Rory." "All right," said Carole briskly. "Meanwhile, I'll find out about J.T. Carpets. Start with the Yellow Pages, then see where I go from there." When Jude got back to Woodside Cottage, she dialed a local number. "Oh, Barbara, it's Jude, from the Coffee Morning. I just wanted to thank you again for going to all that trouble." "Yes, well, we like to make an effort," said Barbara Turnbull's voice. "In fact, I've only just finished clearing up. Maggie, my lady who does, didn't come in today, won't be in tomorrow either, some problem with her son. It's so thoughtless. I told her in no uncertain terms she couldn't assume that the job at Brigadoon would stay open forever." Jude sympathised, and then ventured, "Oh, one thing, Barbara, I'm not registered with a dentist down here, and I wondered whether—" "Rory isn't taking any new National Health patients." "No, I just wondered if you could give me the number of his practice." It was still office hours, so Jude rang the Brighton surgery number she'd been given. Once it had been established that she was prepared to pay for her treatment, the woman at the surgery said they had a cancellation for the following morning. "And that's Mr. Turnbull I'll be seeing?" "Possibly." The voice was cagey. "Or it may be one of the partners. We tend to allocate new patients according to who's free." The first bit of Carole's research also went smoothly. J.T. Carpets were listed in the Yellow Pages with an address not far away. She rang the number. "Hello, my name's Mrs. Seddon, and I'm ringing because I found something which I believe is your property." "What's that, then?" "It's a knife, a Stanley knife. It says J.T. Carpets on it." "Well, then, there's a strong chance it does belong to J.T. Carpets." The girl's voice was poised just the right side of insolence. "Did one of our fitters leave it in your house?" "No, I found it on the beach. I just thought you might want it back." "Not that bothered," said the girl. "I mean, it's only a Stanley knife.
Not like it's the only one in the building. But if you're passing the office, drop it in by all means.
But none of your staff has reported the knife missing?
Oh, come on. If they've lost company property, they're hardly likely to go shouting to the boss about it, are they? And since it is now after 5:30, I'll say thank you very much for calling and goodbye.
The phone was put down with some vigour. Carole was left with the feeling that she had a lot to learn about being a detective. When Jude arrived at the smart dental reception area, she was told that she'd be seen by a Mr. Frobisher. The man, who eventually welcomed her into his surgery, was about 40 and fit-looking, with an unreconstructed Australian accent. "Sorry about the delay. We're having an inspection by the RDO. That's the regional dental officer. Routine stuff, but they always manage to disrupt the whole place." "I was put onto this practice by Barbara Turnbull," said Jude, as she was settled into the chair and floated into a prone position.
"Ah, yes?"
said Mr. Frobisher, without much interest.
"So I thought I might be seen by Mr. Turnbull. The three of us in the practice tend to share out new patients. I hope that's all right with you." "Yes, absolutely fine. So is Mr. Turnbull in today?" "No, he isn't, as it happens."
Mr. Frobisher sat astride his mobile stool and focused the overhead light on her face. For the next few minutes, his probing around her mouth made further conversation impossible. He called out a few notes to the dental nurse, who clicked them on a keyboard. And he gave her little opportunity for further conversation when the examination was concluded.
"Good, no serious problems. Couple of places where your gums are looking a bit red, though. Make an appointment to see one of our hygienists on your way out, will you?"
On the coastline train that rattled through an unbelievable number of small stations on its way back to Fethering, Jude tried to comfort herself with the fact that there was nothing wrong with her teeth. But the predominant feeling in her mind was one she shared with Carole, that she had a lot to learn about being a detective. The Crown and Anchor was on the way back from Fethering Station, and the thought of grabbing a bite to eat there was appealing. Jude was no sooner settled at the bar with a glass of white wine and a baguette than there was a clatter from the front door. She turned to see Rory Turnbull making a clumsy entrance. He hadn't shaved and looked unkempt. The dentist weaved his way up to the bar.
"Large Scotch, please, Ted." "If you're sure." "Of course I'm bloody sure. Otherwise I wouldn't have bloody well asked for it, would I?"
As Ted Crisp turned to get the drink, Jude ventured an approach.
"Hello. We sort of met in here the other night, didn't we?"
"Huh?" Rory Turnbull's eyes had difficulty in focusing on her. "And actually, I went to your surgery this morning. Mr. Frobisher looked after me. Your wife put me in touch." "My wife?" He seemed puzzled by the alien concept.
"Yes, Barbara."
"Oh,
that wife."
He let out a bark of laughter as though this was some huge joke.
"Thanks, Ted."
He took a long swallow from the glass.
"You say my wife put you in touch?" "Yes, everyone needs a dentist, don't they?"
This struck Rory Turnbull as very funny, but just as he launched into a maudlin aria on how hard-working dentists were, a voice called from across the pub.
"Rory, I only just noticed you were in here. I wonder if you could—"
It was Dennis Woodville from the yacht club. He was standing near an alcove where, unnoticed by Jude, he'd been lunching with a large young woman dressed in black. On the seat behind her, where it had been cast off, lay the semicircle of a green anorak.
"No, sorry, Vice Commodore," said Rory Turnbull. "Can't stay. Have to finish my drink and do some very important things."
He set off unsteadily towards the door.
"Oh, what I need to talk to you about is important too."
Dennis Woodville turned to his guest.
"Sorry, Tanya. Be with you in a moment."
The girl had risen from her booth, a lumpen creature in black sweatshirt, leggings and Doc Martens. Hair dyed reddish and cut short, a lot of silver dangling from the perforations in her ears, a silver stud in her nose. She looked anxious.
"It's all right, love," Ted Crisp called across. "The Vice Commodore will be back. You won't be left to pick up the tab."
"I hope not," said the girl.
Lunch is meant to be on Fethering Yacht Club expenses. He wanted to say thank you now I've left. She wrinkled her nose. I hope he's all right. Don't worry, he'll be back in a minute. No sooner had he said the words than the Vice-Commodore returned. While he settled up, Jude attacked her baguette. After the unlikely couple, thin septuagenarian and broad 20-year-old, had left, she turned to Ted. He has a boat, hasn't he, Rory Turnbull? That's right, called Brigadoon, same as his house. Good, thought Jude. At least one of our conjectures has been proved right. But it still didn't prove any link between the owner of the Brigadoon 2 and the body on the beach. By Thursday morning, Carole Seddon had re-established the routine that her discovery of the body and meeting with Jude had interrupted. She took Gulliver for his early morning walk. She did housework and defrosted the fridge. After that, she felt she deserved an omelette and a glass of mineral water with the lunchtime news. At the start of the strident signature tune of the local news, Carole reached for the remote control. But before she pressed the off button, she heard the voiceover menu of headlines, "Drowned boy's mother blames drug culture." Carole's finger froze. A newsreader appeared in shot. The mother of teenager Aaron Spaulding today blamed the ready accessibility of drugs on the South Coast for her son's death. A woman's distraught face filled the screen. Aaron was a good boy. Then he got mixed up with a crowd who was doing lots of drugs, and I'm sure that's what caused his death. Her mouth wobbled as the tears took over. But it wasn't what was said that kept Carole frozen in her chair. It was the fact that she'd seen the woman before, in that very sitting room, holding a gun. Any thoughts of trying to give up being a detective evaporated as if they'd never been there. Now there was something positive to link the two fatalities. Carole rushed out, not even bothering to lock the front door, and hurried up the garden path of Woodside Cottage. When the bell prompted no response, she hammered on the dark wooden door. But there was no one in. Returning to her own house, she left a message on Jude's answering machine, asking her to phone back as soon as possible. Then she sat waiting in an agony of frustration. She was still there, deep in thought, when there came a furious ringing at her doorbell. Jude was back from the Crown and Anchor. "That woman," said Jude, "we've got to talk to her." "But, Jude, she'll be in a terrible state. She's only recently lost her son." "She's also only recently threatened you with a gun. Come on, we've got to get to the bottom of what happened, haven't we? The dead boy is called Aaron Spaulding, so let's assume she's a Spaulding too. Do we have a first name for her?" Carole screwed up her pale blue eyes. "There was a caption up over the interview. Yes, Teresa." "Though, presumably," said Jude, grabbing the Worthing area telephone directory, "the entry would be in her husband's name." "If she's got a husband, you never know these days." There were 10 Spauldings, none with the initial T. None had anyone of that name on the premises. Then Carole had an idea. "Local paper. Comes out today." The front page of the Fethering Observer was dominated by the headline, "Tragedy of Drowned Teenager." Beside it, the boyish school photograph of Aaron Spaulding appeared again. "Look," said Jude, "there's the address. Mrs. Teresa Spaulding of Drake Crescent, Fethering. Where's that?" "Up on the Downside Estate, I think," said Carole. "So, when do we go and try to talk to her?" "No time like the present," said Jude brightly. "How do we get there?" "In my car, unless you want to go in yours." "Haven't got one," Jude grinned. "Never felt the need." The Downside Estate had been built as council housing. Its tiny front gardens were unkempt and littered. The drab November weather did not add to the estate's charms, as Carole navigated her sensible and immaculately clean Renault towards Drake Crescent. Outside one maisonette was a van bearing the regional television station's logo.
A couple of dour technicians were rolling up cables, while an effete young man stood awkwardly by. Carole parked the car, and Jude jumped out. As she started up the short path that led to Teresa Spaulding's front door, the young man said, "I'm not sure she wants to talk to anyone else at the moment. Unless, of course, you're social workers." "That's right," Jude replied breezily as she pressed the doorbell. It was a moment or two before the front door was half opened. The woman was undoubtedly the one who'd come to Carole's house. Her darting eyes were raw with weeping.
"What do you want? I don't want to talk to no one."
"We may be able to help you find out how Aaron died," said Jude.
"My boy's dead. That's all that matters to me. I don't want to talk about it."
Carole stepped forward. "Then perhaps you do want to talk about why you drew a gun on me." Reluctantly, the crack of the door widened.
"You'd better come in, then."
Teresa Spaulding gestured to a couple of broken-down chairs, stubbed out the remains of a cigarette, and with trembling hands shook another out of a packet. She remained standing while she lit the new one. "Mrs. Spaulding," Jude began, "I understand—"
It's not Mrs. But if you think that means I didn't bring up Aaron right—
"We're not saying that. Look, Teresa, can I call you Teresa? I'm Jude, and my friend's called Carole. We're desperately sorry about what happened to Aaron."
"Why? What business is it of yours?"
"None," Carole responded, "if you hadn't come to my house and threatened me with a gun."
"Oh, you needn't have worried," said Teresa Spaulding. "It wasn't a real gun, just a thing Aaron bought."
The good cop and the bad cop exchanged glances. "What really interests me," said Carole, "is that you mentioned the body I'd found on the beach that morning. Did Aaron tell you about that?"
"Aaron didn't have anything to do with that bloke dying. Aaron was a good boy."
The words unleashed a flood of tears. Jude rose and put an arm around her, led the woman to sit down. "Cry," she murmured. "It's good. You need to cry." Carole picked up again. "You were particularly concerned about something in the dead man's pocket. What was it?"
"I don't know, but it was something with Aaron's name on it. They all had to put their name on it. It was part of the test. I was afraid the police would find it."
"Who's they?" asked Jude softly.
"The other lads, the ones he was with when they found the body."
"At the yacht club?" Teresa nodded.
"Aaron got in about 4 that morning, crying like a kid. Oh, they'd been drinking. Then they broke into the yacht club. It wasn't Aaron's idea. It was the others. And they broke into one boat and found this man's body. He was definitely dead before they found him. I don't know what they did to it, or what they put in his pockets, but it was some kind of test. Anyway, it ended up with them chucking the body over the sea wall into the Feather. Aaron was in a bad way. Kept saying the undead body would come after him. I tried to calm him and put him to bed. In the morning I found he'd gone. That was the last time I saw my boy. Oh, that's why I came round your place with a gun. I had to stop anyone who knew anything about the body talking to the police. But Aaron didn't come back. It was the drugs. He was convinced this undead body was going to come after him. So he must have jumped into the Feather at high tide. And that was the end."
"What about his friends?" said Jude. "The ones he was with?"
"Friends?" Teresa Spaulding spat out the word. "There's a bunch that gets together. Could have been any of them. But there's one I'm sure was involved. Older boy. Aaron worshipped him. I'm sure it was him who got Aaron into drugs. Name's Dylan, a tall, thin lad with short bleached hair. Wears one big earring."
"Any idea where he lives?"
"Somewhere local. He's left the school. Think he's got a job now."
"Doing what?"
"Carpet fitter."
said Teresa Spaulding. J.T. Carpets was a flat, rectangular building on a retail estate just outside East Preston. There were few customers that afternoon, and the two women were quickly accosted by a young man in a sharp suit. Jude announced that she was looking for a hard-wearing carpet for her landing and staircase. As the young man started to offer suggestions, Carole broke in. "Excuse me, do you have a toilet?" "What?" The young man was totally thrown. "I need to go to the toilet." "Oh, well, we don't have public toilets." "You must have staff facilities." "Yes, but I'm desperate. It's my age." The young man was so embarrassed by this that he immediately called over one of his female colleagues. Jude hid her grin as Carole was escorted out to the office area at the back. "Now, your cheapest option," the young man continued, blanking out the interruption, "would be a hard-wearing cord." Jude listened, occasionally throwing in doubts and questions. Just as she was running out of steam, Carole returned from the lavatory. "Better?" "Much better, thanks. How are you doing?" "This young gentleman has been extremely helpful," said Jude. "But I think I'd better go home and discuss the options with Kevin." "Good idea," said Carole. It wasn't until they were back in the car that she asked, "Who the hell's Kevin?" "A necessary fiction. Did you find out what you wanted to?" "Yes. Dylan is scheduled to be fitting carpets in a house on the Shorlands estate tomorrow morning for a Mrs. Grant Edwards. I've memorised the details." "How did you find out?" "From a duty schedule board in the office. Mind you, they might have told us if we'd just asked." She giggled. "But the way I did it was much more fun." Just before 9 the following morning, Gulliver having been duly walked, Carole brought the Renault to a stop opposite an Elizabethan pastiche with tall windows and bunches of thin, imaginatively topped chimneys. Its name, Bally High, was spelled out in rustic pokerwork on a piece of driftwood. In the driveway, behind closed railings, a large green Jaguar squatted, toad-like. "I think we're just in time," Jude said. "Look!" A yellow transit van was drawing up. Lettering on the side read, J.T. Carpets. "Here we go," said Carole, her hand tightening round the Stanley knife in her pocket. Two men got out of the van and went round to open the doors at the back. Both were middle-aged, one completely bald, the other with grizzled grey hair. Jude shook her head ruefully. "Looks like Dylan's called in sick." But just as she spoke, they heard the sound of a car approaching fast. It was a souped-up Golf GTI. "I think this could be our quarry," said Carole as she opened the door. They were both standing in front of Bally High's railings by the time the boy emerged from his Golf. Bleached hair, single earring. He looked through them as he came up to the gates. "Are you Dylan?" asked Carole. "What if I am?" "I've got something that belongs to you." Carole took the Stanley knife out of her pocket and held it in her open palm. Though he quickly covered it up, the boy's first reaction was undoubtedly one of shock. "Oh, well, thanks," he said casually, reaching out for the knife. Carole withdrew her hand. "Don't you want to know where we found it?" "Not particularly." "We found it in a boat at the Fethering Yacht Club," said Jude. Dylan's lip curled. "Nosy pair of old tarts, aren't you?" He made to push past them. Jude put her hand on his sleeve. "We have proof that you were at the yacht club on Monday night," she lied, "with Aaron Spaulding and another boy." Dylan turned back to look her straight in the face. "What if I was? Not crime, is it? We sank a few cans in a shelter on the front, and Aaron asked me if I'd lend him my Stanley knife, so I did." "What did he want it for?" "How should I know?" he shrugged. "And then I went home. I didn't go down the yacht club. What the other two done, I've no idea. Now, if you'll excuse me, I do have work to do." "Don't you want your knife back?" asked Carole. "If not, I'll keep it." "Please yourself." "As evidence."
Evidence of what?
Suddenly, he'd seized the lapel of Carole's raincoat and brought his face close up to hers. Her nostrils were filled with a sickly musk-flavoured aftershave.
You two harass me any more and things could get very unpleasant, so I'd advise you both to get off my bloody back.
He raised his free hand to Carole's face. She flinched. Dylan chuckled and touched her cheek. Then he let go of her coat and turned towards the house.
"Who was the third boy?" said Jude. "There was you and Aaron Spaulding and someone else." "That's for you to find out, mind you. I don't think you will." "Why, is he dead too?" Jude called after retreating back as Dylan strode up the drive. But there was no answer, and the Stanley knife remained in Carole's hand. "He's lying,"
Jude hissed, the first time that Carole had seen her angry.
"He was with them at the yacht club."
"I know," said Carole,
"but how are we going to prove it?"
They didn't have far to go through the Shawlands estate to reach Brigadoon. The front garden's Victorian lampposts continued to look incongruous in their mock Spanish surroundings. The woman who came to the door was probably in her late 40s. She wore jeans and a faded sweatshirt. Her face looked drained and exhausted. "Good morning," she said in a surprisingly cultured voice. "I'm afraid Mrs. Turnbull isn't in."
"You're Maggie?"
said Jude. "We were hoping you'd be back. It was you we wanted a word with about your son." The woman's shoulders drooped. "What's he done?" "That's what we want to find out. In particular, what he was doing last Monday night." The woman's eyes widened, and some instinct told Carole this was the moment again to produce the Stanley knife. "What's that? Where did you find it?" This woman had something to tell them. They didn't want to lose her. Just then, the telephone on the hall table rang. Maggie said urgently, "Listen, I can't talk now. You'd better come to my place. Number 26, Spindrift Lane. It's not far. Say 12:30. I'll be back by then." "Fine," said Jude. "And please, don't say anything to anyone." There was a naked appeal in Maggie's eyes as she echoed Teresa Spaulding's words. "Nick's a good boy. He is, really."
This video was uploaded to the channel Thinking Out Louder. Please like, comment and subscribe to the Thinking Out Louder channel. Thank you.
The front lawn of 26 Spindrift Lane was unkempt. The paint on the window frames blistered and split. Maggie Kent had changed out of her working clothes into a navy woolen suit. She ushered her two visitors into the sitting room, then stood in front of the fireplace and confronted them. "All right. What's Nick being accused of?" "We're not accusing your son of anything," Jude replied calmly. "You've heard about the death of Aaron Spaulding. Well, we believe he was messing around on the seafront on Monday night with two other youths, one called Dylan. And we think the other one was your son Nick," said Carole. When Maggie spoke, her voice was quiet and measured. "Are you suggesting that my son had anything to do with Aaron Spaulding's death?" "No," said Jude. "Whatever happened to Aaron happened on the Tuesday. We're concerned about events on the Monday. We think a crime was committed that night." "All right," said Maggie. "I want to know what happened then as much as you do. But tell me first, how you know Nick was involved." "Guesswork and a bit of luck," said Jude. "When I went for coffee at Barbara Turnbull's, she complained that her cleaning lady couldn't come in because of some problem with her son. Well, I just made the connection." Maggie sighed. "Okay. Sam, that's my husband, lost his job about 3 years ago.
He worked in the printing industry, managerial. Good house, 2 cars, son at private school. Then he was out, with a year's money. He started drinking. Then he got into drugs. Cannabis, then the hard stuff. To dull the pain, he kept saying. The rows got worse and worse. Then, one day, he just upped and went. Took his passport, the lot. I've never seen him again.
And all this had a bad effect on Nick, said Jude.
Devastating. He'd worshipped his father. And then, with the money running out, it meant changing schools and... Well, he used to mix with a much less damaging bunch of kids than he does now. Going back to Monday night, Jude prompted, what time did Nick get home? Not that late. 1, 2... But he went out again early next morning. Someone rang wanting to speak to him. I don't know what was said, but he threw some clothes on and rushed out. He was shaking like a leaf. Of course, I was due up at Brigadoon to be a dutiful Mrs. Mop. So I wait around as long as I can, and then, just when I'm about to leave, Nick comes back in a worse state than ever, sobbing like a baby. He was hysterical.
Did he tell you the reason?
He'd been out with Dylan and Aaron the night before. They'd had a few drinks. I think they did some drugs, too. And apparently they got talking about black magic. Oh, some gobbledygook. Then they broke into the yacht club. Just for a lark, he said.
What about that Stanley knife I showed you this morning?
He mentioned Dylan had his knife with him. But he said none of the boats had been vandalised.
It's Nick's trip the next morning that seems really to have upset you, said Jude. Did you find out anything about that?
Nothing. When he came in, he was in such a terrible state of shock. Oh, I did notice he had sand on his trainers.
So he'd been to the beach, Carole stated the obvious.
But you really have no idea what the 3 of them got up to at the yacht club?
Maggie shook her head. Do you think, Jude suggested diffidently, he might tell more to someone who wasn't his mother?
Nick, said Maggie Kent, this is Jude. She wants to talk to you.
The boy stood framed in the sitting-room doorway. Well, I don't want to talk to her, he said. He turned to bolt, but was stopped by Jude's even voice saying, I want to talk to you about this knife, Nick. The colour left his face and tears welled in his eyes.
Is she from the police?
No, said Maggie.
Where did you get that?
In the bottom of a boat at Fethering Yacht Club. A boat called Brigadoon 2. I think you'd better tell me about it. There was a long silence. Then Maggie said, I'll go and put the kettle on. Give me a call when I can come in again. The door shut behind her.
How much do you know?
Asked Nick. What you told your mother. And a little bit more. I know you were with Dylan and Aaron Spaulding on Monday night. I know you had some beers, probably some drugs, too.
It was only cannabis. Dylan had it with him. He said we were goody-goodies, scared of breaking the law.
And you proved him wrong by breaking into the yacht club and choosing a boat at random, and Dylan got out his knife and cut through the rope holding down the cover. But what you didn't tell your mother was what you found in the boat.
There's no reason why I should tell you either, said the boy defiantly.
I agree, though I could still take the Stanley knife to the police.
That doesn't prove anything.
No, Jude agreed softly, not until they find the body. The boy looked shaken.
How do you know about the body?
Jude heaved a mental sigh of relief. He'd fallen for it, conceded that there had been a body in the boat.
We were horrified when we found it. The moon was full that night. We could only see this outline. But we knew he was dead. And then Dylan. He's into the occult, you know, black magic, the undead. And he said if Aaron and I wanted to show we were really hard, cutting a dead man's flesh under a full moon, it would make us strong. Then, if we wrote our names in blood and left them on the man's body, we'd have special powers.
And you believed him?
Dylan kept saying we were cowards, and then he took the knife and made a cut in the man's neck. Then Aaron took the knife and made a cut.
And did you, Nick? The boy shuddered and shook his head. What about writing the names in blood?
Aaron did that. He wrote his name and put it in the dead man's pocket.
And Dylan?
Oh, he said he didn't need to because he was the leader.
Anger seethed within Jude. The older boy had egged on the others, but he wasn't going to incriminate himself. He'd allow the gullible Aaron Spaulding to do so, though, and no doubt build up the boy's natural paranoia with garish tales of the undead. He was probably directly responsible for Aaron's suicide. And what happened then, Nick?
Then we suddenly panicked at what we'd done. We didn't want to leave any signs, any evidence, so we took the body and we...
And you threw it over the sea wall into the Feather.
How do you know all this?
Sobbed the boy. Then you all went your separate ways, but Aaron rang next morning to say he'd found the body washed up by the tide.
Yes.
At last there was corroboration for what Carole had seen on the Tuesday morning.
Aaron said the undead body was coming back to haunt him. So I went down the beach and met him. We thought if we put the body back in the boat, nobody'd ever know we'd been there.
Well, behaviour of that kind, concluded Carole, sitting back on her bar stool in disgust, is all too typical of the youth of today. I'm not excusing the boy's behaviour, said Jude calmly. I'm just saying, from the pain in his eyes, he'd hurt himself by what he'd done much more than he'd hurt anyone else. Now, let me get you another drink. The pub door clattered behind them, and they turned to see an agitated Dennis Woodville approaching the bar. Evening, Vice Commodore.
Oh, hello, ladies. Is Ted in?
He asked the barmaid. Oh, he's out the back talking to some people. The police, actually. Can I get you a drink, sir?
Large brandy, please.
No more break-ins at the club? Asked Carole.
What?
He seemed distracted.
No, I don't think so. Though it does seem we've been the victim of criminal activity.
He might have elaborated on this portentously delivered hint had not Ted Crisp at that moment appeared through the door behind the bar.
Evening, Ted,
said the Vice-Commodore.
I gather you've had the police with you. I wonder if they came to see you for the same reason they came to see me.
The landlord cocked an interrogative eye.
Missing person, was it? Yes.
Look, if you both know, you might as well tell us, said Jude impatiently. Come on, what's it all about? Ted Crisp saw no point in secrecy.
Police came in asking if I'd seen Rory Turnbull recently. Same with you, Dennis?
Yes.
Well, sometime after 12, said Ted, it seems our Rory buggered off in the BMW. His wife got home round 2 and immediately raised the alarm.
What? Said Carole. Surely there's no harm in a grown man going off for a drive in his own car when he feels like it.
Not usually, there isn't, said Ted. But there is when he leaves a suicide note.
A silence followed his words. Then Dennis Woodville spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had secret information to impart.
I had a meeting with our accountant yesterday. Someone has been ciphering funds out of the club's bank account. Total of £1,000. The only registered signatories for yacht club cheques are the Commodore, the Vice-Commodore, and the Treasurer, who is, of course, Rory Turnbull. He knew I was having the meeting. I imagine he just didn't want to face the music.
But why would he have done it? Demanded Carole. Put his hand in the yacht club till for £1,000. I mean, someone in his position, dentist salary, big house.
Oh, you'd be amazed.
Ted Crisp shook his craggy head. He looked at their glasses.
Come on, let's have another drink. This round's on me. Of course, people develop expensive habits too, he ruminated as he poured the drinks. Rory Turnbull was getting through the Scotch in here like there was no tomorrow.
But on his income, presumably, he could afford an alcohol habit.
An alcohol habit, yes, Carole.
What do you mean? Are you saying Rory Turnbull was into drugs?
The body was put in Rory Turnbull's boat, said Carole as they reached the gate of Woodside Cottage. That's the only thing we've got linking Aaron Spaulding's death and Turnbull's suicide.
Maybe it's just an unfortunate coincidence.
It's not much, admitted Jude.
Well, said Carole, I think we need to know more about Rory Turnbull. What pushed him over the edge?
And whether he did have anything to do with drugs, said Jude.
You noticed that too, when Ted hinted at something and then clammed up.
Yes. I'll follow up on that tomorrow.
How?
Let's say I have an idea of where to start.
And I, announced Carole, will make it my business to find out more about Rory Turnbull.
How will you do that?
Let's say I have an idea of where to start, came the lofty reply.
Carole Seddon could also play mysterious when she needed to. Spray Lodge was the nearest residential building to the river. Its most valued flats looked out over the yacht club and the sea wall, from the repair works on which Carole could hear the monotonous thud of the pile driver. When she buzzed through on the entry phone, Winnie Norton's carefully enunciated tones inquired,
"Yes? Who is it?"
"It's Carole Seddon. I've got the Canine Trust raffle tickets."
"Oh, splendid! Do come up!"
And the entry phone box buzzed admission. When she opened the door of the flat, Winnie Norton was revealed in a cherry-coloured woolen suit with gold braiding and buttons. Her hair was fixed like stiff meringue on the top of her head. With her spare hand, she held the yapping Churchill to her chest.
"Look who's come to see you," she cooed. "It's your friend Carole. Now, dear, you do have time for a coffee, don't you?"
As Winnie Norton brought in the coffee tray, Carole reflected that her hostess wasn't acting like someone whose son-in-law had just committed suicide. Maybe she didn't yet know.
"I heard a terrible rumour about Rory Turnbull in the supermarket this morning," she ventured.
"I do hope it's not true."
"It's true, all right, and absolutely typical of the man. Selfish to the end."
"They've found the body?"
"No, not yet. That man's never thought of anyone but himself. Not our class of person at all. I could see that from the day I first met him. What's more, everyone in Fethering will assume that there was something wrong with their marriage."
"And wasn't there?" asked Carole.
"The only thing Barbara did wrong was choosing an unsuitable man in the first place. She's behaved like a saint throughout, in spite of all the dreadful things Rory did."
"What kind of things? Was he unfaithful to Barbara?"
Good heavens, no. No, it was more mental cruelty, I suppose you'd call it. He collected pornography, you know.
Did he?
Poor Barbara found boxes of the stuff when she was looking through their loft. Rory was up to all kinds of other things as well. He came back in the small hours only a couple of months ago, and he'd had a tooth knocked out. And then there was the drinking.
Had he always drunk? Asked Carole. Getting the information she was after was going to be remarkably easy.
He'd always had it in him, said Winnie Norton, but it was only in the last few months it had got out of hand. And it wasn't just drink.
The old lady leaned forward.
I think he was spending all their money on drugs. Barbara had suspected, and I found some stuff in Rory's study. In his desk drawer there was a syringe and some metal foil and a little packet of white powder.
I'm distressed to hear that, Winnie, Carole said blandly. Do give my condolences to Barbara, won't you?
Condolences? She needs congratulations. 28 years of misery, and now, finally, she's shot of him.
Yes, said Carole. Of course.
Now, about these raffle tickets.
Jude, meanwhile, had decided she'd have to call on her acting skills to further her own research. She rang through to J.T. Carpets, announced herself as Mrs. Grant Edwards, and, putting on a voice of excruciating gentility, said she would like to contact one of their carpet fitters, a young man named Dillon.
You see, he was working in our house, and he appears to have left his wallet behind, so I just wanted to ring him and put his mind at rest.
The girl gave Jude his home number. She was in luck. He was at home. Is that Dillon? Yeah? Who wants him? I was given your name. I want some gear. What kind of gear? Pot. Dillon laughed harshly. What makes you think I might be able to help you? Jude took the risk and backed her hunch. Rory Turnbull, she said. The silence lasted so long she feared she'd miscalculated. Then Dillon repeated, Rory Turnbull, eh? Our fine, upstanding dentist? Yes, he said he was a customer of yours. At one time? I don't carry the stuff he was after. He wanted hard drugs. Yeah, smack. I gave him the name of a contact in Brighton and didn't hear from him again. So I guess that's where he took his business. Who was that contact? Jude realised she'd been over-eager, even before Dillon responded. Hey, just a minute. I thought you said it was weed. Or was it pot you were after? Yes, she agreed contritely. Can you help me? That afternoon, over a cup of tea at Carole's, the two women pooled what they'd gleaned. They'd found reasons why Rory Turnbull might have wanted to take his own life, but they'd found nothing that linked him with the body Carole had found on Fethering Beach. Jude screwed up her eyes. Is there something obvious we're missing? There was a long silence. Then Carole said, Teresa Spaulding. There's something I should have asked her and didn't. Why did she come here? How did she know I'd found the body? She wasn't there, so she must have talked to someone who saw me. But who? They drove straight up to Downside in the Renault. A bunch of kids were loitering in Drake Crescent outside Teresa Spaulding's front door. They watched in silence as Carole repeatedly rang the bell. Only when she banged on the door did one of the kids shout out, She's not here, they've taken her away. Who's taken her away? They all seemed keen to pitch in with information. An ambulance come. They took her where the crazy people go. She totally lost it. She's in the nut house. The loony bin. Carole and Jude exchanged rueful looks. They went back to the car and drove off to a burst of derisive laughter. The Saturday evening and the Sunday compounded their frustration. Both kept contemplating calling round next door to discuss their investigation further, but both knew there was nothing else to say. So Carole watched Saturday evening television, and on Sunday took Gulliver out for longer walks than usual. Next door, Jude unpacked some books and stacked them upright in old wine crates in her bedroom. She did her yoga. She too realised nothing could happen until Rory Turnbull's suicide was confirmed to have taken place. At the Brighton dental surgery on Monday morning, Jude was directed to a different waiting room for her appointment with the hygienist. The plate on the door read Holly Draper. The door opened, and the previous patient was ushered out by a short, unnatural blonde with large, honey-coloured eyes, wearing a white overall and latex gloves. She turned to Jude and smiled. "Well, hello. You must be—" "Everyone calls me Jude." "I'm Holly. Jude, as in Judith, is that right? If you'd like just to come through to my little room, lovely. Make yourself comfortable in the chair, would you? I'll just glance at your notes. Oh, Mr. Frobisher says we've a bit of inflammation round our gums. Oh dear, aren't we a naughty girl? Right, well, I'd better have a look, hadn't I?" Turning to pick up her instruments, she left a fractional pause into which Jude managed to insert, "Dreadful news about Rory Turnbull, wasn't it?" "Oh, yes, everyone here is gobsmacked. Now, if you just open for me and pop this in. Do you floss at all? I'm just going to go round and pick up a bit of the muck between your teeth. No, I mean, Rory wasn't a particularly happy man, but I'd never have thought he was the kind to do away with himself. Mind you, after what came out last week, it was perhaps a little less surprising. When the regional dental officer came to inspect, it was clear something was seriously wrong, and could you shift your chin down a bit, please? I mean, getting on for £10,000 of dental work he claimed for but never carried out. Right, now we'll just give them a nice clean-up, shall we?" She turned to an articulated drill-like machine and fitted a small circular brush into its socket. This she dipped into a tub of paste. These actions did not for a moment interrupt her monologue. "Not that Rory was a bad man. He did some charity work, I believe, and he could be generous. There was this girl he quite often used to give a lift back to Fethering after work." "Who was that?" Jude squeezed in the question. "I don't know. Girl of about 20, I suppose. Short hair, sort of hennaed. I think she worked evenings in Fethering, which is why he sometimes gave her a lift." "Well, she'll have to find someone else to do it for her now, won't she?" "There, all nice and clean. Lovely. Look in the mirror. Doesn't that look better? But now I'm going to be a real bully and give you a big lecture about flossing. Are you feeling strong enough?" Carole's frustration mounted through the Monday morning. Still, there was one approach which might lead to further information. She looked up a number in the local directory and rang it. "Winnie, it's Carole Seddon. I just rang to say thank you so much for the coffee on Saturday morning." "Oh, it was a pleasure to see you." In the background, something yapped. "And I just wondered, is there any sign of an end to poor Barbara's ordeal?" "Barbara's ordeal gets worse by the minute. She's just discovered that so-called husband of hers had remortgaged the house without telling her. There's nothing in any of their savings accounts. And then to commit suicide so that she doesn't even get any of the insurance. Oh, how awful, Winnie. But when you talk about suicide, I mean, that is definite now, is it? They've found his body?" "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time. Thank goodness my poor baby's got my money to fall back on." "Well, look," said Carole, "I hope you get some good news soon."
The only good news I can get is the confirmation that the man is dead, said Winnie Norton.
Jude and Carole were walking along the beach on the Monday afternoon. The tide was low, and the soft sand sucking at their feet made progress slow. Gulliver scampered around them.
The only thing I know, said Jude wryly, is that Rory Turnbull isn't dead.
How do you know that? Said Carole. All the evidence points the other way.
There's too much evidence. I detect a bit of overkill in the planning here.
Planning? Who's planning?
Rory Turnbull's, I imagine. Though what he was planning and why, I've no idea.
She looked across towards the yacht club. Behind it, the men who had been repairing the sea wall were dismantling their site. The cranes had already gone.
And is there any connection between Turnbull's disappearance and the body on the beach? Where did that body go, Carole? Where, come to that, is it now?
Jude's eyes moved restlessly across the horizon and focused on a high 1930s house with a glass-fronted top floor. As she looked, a flash of sunlight caught on something behind the glass.
That tall house, Carole. Who lives up there?
Some old bloke. I don't know his name. He's completely housebound, I think.
But from the top of that house he can see everything that happens on the beach.
Well, yes, he probably can, but...
Come on!
And Jude had started running up the beach. Gulliver, recognising another game, pursued her, barking enthusiastically. Boldly, Jude pressed the entry phone button. There was no response. She was about to press again when an electronic voice from the little speaker said,
"Hello."
"Good afternoon. Are you the gentleman in the top flat?"
"Yes."
"Our names are Carole and Jude. Might we come up and talk to you?"
"About what?"
"About things you may have seen on the beach over the past week." There was a pause. Then the door buzzed its release, and they went in, leaving Gulliver tied to a garden seat outside. They emerged from the lift onto a small landing. Framed in the doorway opposite was a small man in a wheelchair. He was partially paralysed, his head propped back at a strange angle. His left hand was strapped against the arm of his chair, while his right hovered over a control panel of buttons and levers. He wore a crested blazer and a cravat high round his neck. On his head was an incongruous corduroy cap.
"Good afternoon. Carole and Jude, was it?"
They realised he was talking through some kind of voice box. The cravat must have been there to hide a tracheotomy scar.
"Come in,"
he said, flicking a control and going into sharp reverse.
"My name's Gordon Lithgow, by the way."
A window took up the entire front wall. There was a platform with a ramp, and on the platform stood a telescope on a tripod. 2 powerful pairs of binoculars lay on a nearby table.
"I believe you are here for a purpose," said Gordon Lithgow. "I saw you deciding to come up."
"You saw us?" said Carole.
"On the beach. Pity I can't lip read, but your body language told me you decided to come up here."
"Do you spend most of the day watching the beach?" asked Jude.
"No, I'm basically looking for shipping. Make a log of their comings and goings."
"And what about the people on the beach?" Jude maintained her direct approach. "Do you make a log of their comings and goings too?" He spun the wheelchair round and faced them. He was smiling.
"I assume what you're interested in is the dead body which you, Carole, is it, found on the beach on Tuesday morning."
Carole felt uncomfortable to know she'd been observed so closely. "What we want to know is what happened to the body after I found it around 7. He spun round and selected a ledger from a pile on a shelf. He flicked through the book with his good hand. 7:02. Then you went back home with your dog. At 7:06, a boy climbed over the railings of the yacht club and raised the cover of one of the boats. He then ran out and along the sea wall, looking down into the Feather. Then he ran down onto the beach and found the body at 7:21. He ran off, then came back with another boy. They manhandled the body up the beach, over the railings into the yacht club, and put it back in the boat, the same boat the first boy had looked in. Then they ran off. At 10:12, the police arrived, looked along the beach, not very hard, and left. "But what happened to the body after that?" asked Jude.
That's all I can offer you. Great telescope, but it doesn't have night sights.
"So," Carole sighed despondently, "it looks as though the body was removed on the Tuesday night under cover of darkness. Where would you put a body, Mr. Lithgow? Into another boat?" There was a scrape of electronic laughter.
Come and have a look.
The telescope was trained on the top of the sea wall, where the repairs had been taking place. Revealed were the 2 blue-painted low chests used by the local fishermen to store their bait and equipment.
Bit big, said Gordon Lithgow, but otherwise the right shape for a coffin, isn't it?
"Jude, have a look. And of course," said Carole thoughtfully, "if whoever it was put the body in there just as a temporary measure and didn't know what was about to happen, their plans would have been really screwed up by the builders coming in." "Yes." Jude rose from the telescope. "They would, wouldn't they?" "We'd better go, Mr. Lithgow," said Carole, "but I really can't thank you enough."
Any visitor is a welcome diversion. There are some people who come to see me occasionally, but—
"Teresa Spaulding," said Jude suddenly. "Teresa Spaulding used to come and see you, didn't she?"
She did, yes.
"And you mentioned the body on the beach to her, and described Carole, which explains why she came to your house, Carole, but there's something we're forgetting. The person you saw on the beach before you found the body."
"Ah," said Gordon Lithgow, "I wondered if you'd ask about that. That'd be the one who saw the body at 6:57, wearing a shiny green anorak."
"Yes. Who was he?"
"Wasn't a he. It was a she. Young girl. It was hardly light, but she was running from the direction of the yacht club. Seemed in a panic until she found the body."
"What did she look like?" asked Jude.
"Couldn't see the colour of her hair. She had her anorak hood done up tight. Large young woman, though. And I could see one thing. She had a silver stud in her nose."
They set out back towards the high street. "We've got to talk to Tanya," said Jude. "She's not the only young woman in the world with a silver nose stud." "No, but she's the only one who has a connection with Fethering Yacht Club. If only we could also find a connection between her and Rory Turnbull." "Well, he was treasurer of the club, so she must have met him there." "Yes," said Jude. "Have we got anything else, though?" "What about the girl your dental hygienist mentioned?" "Of course! If she lived in Brighton and was doing an evening shift at the club bar, the timing would be right for Rory to give her the occasional lift to work when he'd finished at the surgery." "Then we definitely need to talk to Tanya," said Carole. "Before we go into the exhumation business?" "Yes, and for that I think we need help." The Vice-Commodore was in, though on his home territory he seemed less assured than in the surroundings of the yacht club. The house's interior was distinctly shabby. In the air, as well as stale Gauloise smoke, hovered the sickly smell of rotting fruit. The squalor of the room brought home to Jude the emptiness of the old man's life.
"I'm sorry, it's a bit of a tip,"
he barked with an attempt at bluffness. Moving aside an ashtray and a couple of smeared beer mugs from a dresser, he rifled through a pile of dusty newspapers and unopened letters. He had shown no surprise at being asked for Tanya's number, and no curiosity as to why it might be wanted.
"Oh, damn, doesn't seem to be here. But I've got the number down at the club. Due to open up there soon anyway, if you wouldn't mind coming along with me."
There was a little knot of elderly cronies already waiting for Dennis Woodville to unlock the clubhouse. Inside the barroom, with the light switched on, he whispered to Jude,
"Have to get their drinks sorted out first, or I'll never hear the end of it. Can I get you a little something?"
Jude refused, anxious to get away. Eventually, everyone was supplied with a drink, but as the Vice-Commodore turned to a neat address book by the telephone, he noticed the message light flashing on the answering machine.
"Better check this. Might be the Coast Guard," he said importantly.
The message wasn't from the Coast Guard. It was the voice of a bored young woman. "Vice-Commodore, it's Tanya, calling on Monday afternoon. First, thanks for the lunch last week. And the other thing is, could you let me know whether those repairs on the sea wall have been finished yet? I was thinking of coming for a walk to Fethering, and I didn't want to if the building's still going on, you know. Could you call me on—" Jude scribbled the number down on the back of an envelope. "And could I have her address, please?"
"Very odd," said the Vice-Commodore as he pushed the address book across. "What on earth does the girl want to know about the sea wall for?"
"Have you talked to Ted Crisp?" It was the first thing Jude asked when she arrived, and Carole was proud to be able to say, "Yes, he's game for a spot of body hunting, around 7.
"Good."
Jude pulled out her mobile phone and keyed in a number. Hello, is that Tanya? My name's Jude. We met at the Crown and Anchor at Fethering on Friday. I wanted to talk about a body that got washed up on the beach last week." With a rueful expression, Jude turned to Carole. "Maybe the direct approach isn't always the best one. She hung up on me. I think we'd better go and see her." "In Brighton? How will you get there? I'd offer to drive you over, but if I'm meeting Ted at 7, Don't worry, I'll get a cab." And shortly after, Jude set off for Brighton. Carole felt tense, but the anticipation was not unpleasurable. At least something was happening in her life. When the phone rang at 6:25, she felt a little pang of potential disappointment. It would be Ted Crisp calling off their 7 o'clock tryst. It wasn't. "Carole, it's me, Jude. I just got to Brighton and paid off the cab when my mobile rang. It was Maggie Kent. Nick's gone missing." "You have called the police, have you?" Carole asked. Maggie Kent's voice on the telephone was tight with the effort of controlling her emotion. "Yes. At first, they weren't all that interested. Then I told them Nick had been with Aaron Spaulding the night before Aaron died, and they began to take me a bit more seriously. I rang your friend Jude because I thought Nick might have confided something to her last week." "And had he?" "Oh, a few bits and pieces. But he was in such a dreadful state all weekend. I'm scared he'll do what Aaron did." Carole had her own ideas of where she'd start looking for the boy, and, with a bit of luck, she'd have Ted Crisp there to help her. She took a large rubber-covered torch out of the cupboard under the stairs and put on her Burberry. Tanya lived in a tiny bedsit, which, because it boasted its own bathroom, the landlord had the nerve to call a studio flat. She closed the door behind her guest and demanded, "What's all this, then?" She looked massive, stolid, and resentful. "As I said on the phone," began Jude. "I'm talking about a body that was washed up last Tuesday morning. The body of a middle-aged man. We know you saw it." The girl sniffed. "All right. About this body. Yeah. I was going for a walk on the beach and I saw it. And I didn't tell no one, 'cause if you've ever been in care, you know that anything where the police is involved is just going to cause you a lot of grief and hassle." "And did you see anyone else on the beach that morning?" "No. Oh, yeah. There was some old girl taking her dog for a walk." "I see," said Jude. "Going back to the body, had you seen the man before, either dead or alive?" "Bloody hell, no. As far as I'm concerned, he's just some poor bugger who fell off a boat or something. Why? Do you know who he was?" Carole looked at her watch and saw to her irritation that it was already 7:10. There was no sign of Ted Crisp at the entrance to the yacht club where they'd agreed to meet. She sensed she had to act urgently. She lifted the latch on the gate into the forecourt. The sea was a long way down the beach, its rustling muted. Carole trembled a little as she approached the boat. Then she heard the noise, a low keening, like that of some small injured animal, and it came from inside Brigadoon 2. Carole held her torch at the ready. At the moment she flipped back the boat's cover, she pressed the on button. Blearily frozen in its beam was Nick Kent's face. Tears coursed down his cheeks, and he lay curled in a fetal position against the fiberglass hull. "Nick," said Carole gently. The boy squinted into the light. "Who are you?" he sobbed. "My name's Carole. I'm a friend of Jude. Your mother's been terribly worried. She really wants to see you, Nick." "No, I can't see her, not after what I've done." "All I know is you need to go home," said Carole. She stretched out her hand over the transom of the boat. Slowly the boy rose and put his icy hand in hers. As he stepped onto the back of the boat, she braced herself to take the strain. Suddenly he shook his hand free and landed facing away from her. He hit the ground running and weaved his way through the rows of boats towards the Feather. "Help!" shouted Carole up towards the club room. She dropped her torch and ran as fast as she could, but Nick Kent was faster. By the time she reached the railings, he was already standing on the sea wall. She heard behind her a clatter of feet and men shouting as she called out, "It's all right, Nick! Everything's all right!" But the hue and cry she feared had started. One of the yacht club members had found a powerful spotlight, which he focused on the trembling boy. That was the final straw. The boy recoiled, then turned away, and, trailing a thin scream, disappeared over the sea wall into the Feather. Carole reached the sea wall ahead of the others. The Feather was at low tide, and Nick had landed in the mud, the impetus of his jump planting him up to his thighs in the ooze. The level of the water was rising fast. There was a gleaming new ladder against the sea wall. Though encumbered by her raincoat, Carole took a foothold on the top rung and swung herself down. The ladder stopped about a yard above the mud. She undid the belt of her Burberry, slid it out of the loops, and tried to flip it across the void. The buckle landed right by Nick's hand, but he didn't even try to take hold of it. The metal ladder boomed and shook as someone came down to join her. "We can get this rope to him," said an elderly male voice. She squinted upwards. "You'll have to lasso it round him. He's not cooperating." "Damn it," said the voice. "I'll get some duckboards." The tide was now sending ever stronger waves against the outflow of the Feather, and, with each hissing onrush, the water level crept closer to the stranded boy. Carole slipped out of her precious Burberry and flipped it out towards him. "Nick," she called, "grab hold of my coat." "For
God's sake, Nick! Is this really how you want to die? I don't care how it happens, so long as I die, came the petulant reply. But, Nick, what would your father think? Don't talk about my father, he shrieked. He'll never come back. He's gone for good.
At that moment, a rogue wave broke noisily behind him, and he suddenly grabbed hold of the hem of her Burberry. The shock of his weight almost wrenched Carole's arm from its socket.
OK, we're coming with the duckboards, a self-important voice announced from the top of the sea wall. Easy does it. Oh, bugger. For Christ's sake, bawled Carole. Throw down our lifebelt, you stupid old fools!
Then she was aware of the sound of a boat's motor putt-putting closer. Craning round, she saw a small wooden launch approaching, with 2 men in it. The boy's head was now only intermittently visible between the waves. Then, near the boat, there was a splash and a man swimming. Just as the swimmer approached the spot where Nick had been, Carole felt a jolt, and the counter-tension in the Burberry had gone. Then the swimmer shouted,
All right, he's breathing through the snorkel. Chuck the rope down.
There was the sound of a winch, and the swimmer eased Nick's body out of its clammy prison. They manhandled the inert mass over the stern of the boat, and then the swimmer pulled himself aboard. There was a cheer from the top of the sea wall. Carole realised she had no strength left in her arms. Then she felt a ringing through the tubes of the ladder as a heavy body descended. When she felt his strong arms safely cradling her, she said tartly, You were supposed to meet me at 7, Ted Crisp.
Oh, really? I thought you said 8.
Then someone's torch beam lit up the little launch. The bedraggled figure of Nick Kent looked very unsteady, but at least he was upright. He gave Carole a wave and a sheepish little grin. To either side of him were Dennis Woodville and, soaked to the skin but triumphant, Bill Chilcott. My friend Carole and I have been working it out, you see, Jude explained. There's the body you found, Tanya. There's Aaron Spaulding, who committed suicide. And then there's the dentist, Rory Turnbull, who we're meant to think has committed suicide. You know Rory Turnbull, don't you?
Sure, said Tanya. He was treasurer down at the yacht club.
And he sometimes gave you a lift from Brighton to Fethering for your evening shifts.
How do you know that?
Jude shrugged. When did you last see him? The girl coloured.
I finished working at the yacht club Friday before last. Round then, I suppose.
And you haven't seen him since?
No. Anyway, he's gone missing, hasn't he?
Petulantly, the girl kicked at the carpet with one black-booted foot.
What's all this about? Is there something you definitely know about this body I saw on the beach?
There are 2 things I definitely know, said Jude. One is that there is a connection between the body and Rory Turnbull. The other is that Rory Turnbull is still alive.
Well, said a voice, you're right in at least one of those.
The bathroom door had opened silently, and there was a third person in the room. It was Rory Turnbull. Maggie Kent ushered Carole into the bleak front room. Would you like a coffee or something? I'd offer you a real drink, but I'm afraid I don't have anything.
Don't worry. You just go and sort Nick out.
Yes, he's gone up to start the bath. I'll give him a good scrubbing. One thing, said Carole, it's not my business, but if I were you, I wouldn't ask him what happened. He'll tell you when he wants to. The mother nodded. I'd already decided that. But would you mind staying till I've put him to bed? I'd like to hear your account of what happened.
That's fine. Carole looked at her watch. But may I use your telephone?
It was the moment after Rory Turnbull had appeared from the bathroom, before Jude had had time to recover from her surprise and say anything, that her mobile rang. She snatched it from her pocket. "Hello?"
"Jude, it's Carole. Nick Kent's all right."
"Thank God! Listen, I found—" But the mobile was ripped from her hand and switched off. "I don't think you need tell anyone what you found," Rory Turnbull said coolly. Carole, who'd never had a mobile phone, assumed they were unreliable machines and prone to constant breakdowns, so she wasn't surprised to have been cut off. Jude had definitely heard her say that Nick was all right. That was the important news. Anything else could keep. 3/4 of an hour elapsed before Maggie Kent came back downstairs. "He's tucked up in bed and I've given him one of my sleeping pills. But he did want to have a word with you, just to say thank you." Carole found Nick propped up on pillows under a duvet with a Manchester United cover. He looked exhausted, but calm. "I just wanted to say thank you very much," he slurred. "Should have thanked the men, too. Didn't thank them properly." "Don't worry, there'll be plenty of time to do that." There was a shelf of treasures by the boy's bedhead, and on it Carole saw something which unleashed a landslide of explanations. Among Subbuteo footballers and swimming certificates stood a framed photograph. It showed a smiling, grey-haired man in his late 40s. Undoubtedly the missing Sam Kent. And also undoubtedly, in spite of the fact that in the photograph he had no tooth missing, the man whose body Carole Seddon had found on Fethering Beach. "Well," said Jude, "thank you for interrupting my phone call." Rory Turnbull put the turned-off mobile on a table. Then he moved to stand almost protectively behind Tanya's chair. "So, you two are an item?" "Yeah," said the girl. "And what's wrong with that?" "Nothing," said Jude. "There's nothing wrong with love." "Then why are you here?" asked Rory. "What's your name? Jude. How much have you pieced together?" "Well," said Jude, "if on the one hand you have a middle-aged man who, with maximum publicity, has declared he is about to commit suicide, and on the other, the body of a second middle-aged man of similar build, I might suspect some substitution of bodies was being contemplated. Body wearing Rory Turnbull's clothes found in Rory Turnbull's burnt-out car. Body must belong to Rory Turnbull. God knows he had enough reasons, like the ruinous heroin habit that meant he had to remortgage his house and put his hand in the till at the yacht club. Open and shut case." Rory Turnbull nodded slowly. "You have done well, haven't you?" "And what about the dead man?" said Jude. "The one who would so obligingly pretend to be Rory." "He was a waster," said Tanya. "Always hanging round on the beach, out of his head on heroin. Monday before last he took an overdose, and Rory just happened to be the one who found the body." "Tanya," said Rory firmly, "I think we could do with something to drink. Here, nip down to the off-licence and get a litre of grouse." He planted a little kiss on her forehead. "Take care." Jude watched Tanya leave the bedsit. "She's pregnant, isn't she?" "What about it?" "Nothing," said Jude, "except I assume that's the reason you set this whole thing up." "The final reason, yes. The other reasons have been building for years." There was a gleam in Rory Turnbull's eyes. "Me and Tanya is a love match." "I'm sure it is," said Jude. "But does that justify murder?" He gave her a pained look, but then made the confession lightly. "All right. Yes, I first saw him in the summer, hanging round down by the pier. He asked me for money, and I gave him some. I saw him a few times after that. But it was only when I knew Tanya was pregnant that the plan began to form in my mind. "So, how did you kill him?" said Jude. "Where did you kill him?" "Here. I'd sent Tanya out to the cinema. I'd given him money for heroin and he'd had a hit. I smothered him. With that pillow." "So why didn't you fake the suicide the same night?" "I intended to. I laid him on the back seat of my car with a coat over him and set off. On the outskirts of Fethering, a car came towards me, flashing its lights. It was Bill Chilcott, who told me the police were on Seaview Road stopping every car that came along. Random breath tests. That got me scared. There was no other way to the Shorlands estate." "Why did you have to go home?" "Because that's where the petrol and rags and stuff were," he snapped. "Anyway, I panicked. And hid the body inside your boat at the yacht club." He turned pale. "How the hell did you know that?" "Next morning, when Tanya went to check, it was missing. Shortly after, she found it washed up on the beach. Then those boys put the body back in the boat, which meant your plan was all set again, 24 hours late. Why didn't you do it on Tuesday night?" "Because I just lifted the body out of the boat when I heard a noise. There was someone snooping around a boy. Anyway, he screamed and that rattled me." Poor Aaron Spaulding, thought Jude. He'd come back to the scene of his crime and seen the dead body apparently moving. It had been enough to unhinge him. "So," she said, "because other people now knew the body had been stowed inside Brigadoon 2, you had to move it. To one of those blue fisherman's boxes near the yacht club, perhaps? But next morning the area was cordoned off for repairs to the sea wall, so it really wasn't that great a plan, was it?" "It was a brilliant plan," he spat, "and I'm still going ahead with it. Only this time, Jude, you're going to be part of the plan." When Carole got home from Maggie Kent's house, she poured herself a large scotch from the bottle she kept for guests. Now she knew the identity of the body, she could understand the reason for Nick's collapse. To have been involved in a black magic ritual with a corpse was bad enough, but to discover in the cold light of day that the body was that of your idolized father would have unhinged the most stable of adults. She remembered that she'd intended to spend the evening with Ted Crisp, looking for the body at the sea wall. But now that the dead man possessed an identity and a family context, the idea of further probing became distasteful. Carole decided she'd done enough for the evening, and now she was going to have a very long soak in a very hot bath. But just then her telephone rang. When Tanya had returned to the bedsit, Rory had got her to help to tie Jude up, with soft scarves over her clothes, so as not to leave any marks on her body. Then they had manhandled her down to the garage and into the back seat of the BMW. She'd lain there nearly an hour now, while upstairs the two conspirators presumably went through the final details of their elopement. When Rory Turnbull finally returned, he was alone. Briskly he opened the garage doors, drove the BMW out, and closed them again, before setting off at a steady pace west out of Brighton. "It won't work, you know," said Jude. "The body's been dead a week. The post-mortem will show that, regardless of how much the body's disfigured by fire." "Change of plan," he said. "By the time the body's found, nobody'll be able to give a precise date of death. All they'll have to identify him by will be the fact that he's in my car wearing my clothes. And, of course, they'll be able to check his dental work." "My God," said Jude, "the missing tooth." "I don't know how he lost it, but as soon as I noticed it, I knew what I had to do." "You mean you actually took out one of your own?" "Not difficult for someone of my profession. I made up a story to Barbara about being in a fight. Then I had a rather distinctive chromium-cobalt denture made for me by our usual lab. And the plate also fits the dead man's mouth. He was very full of himself now. "You said," Jude began with trepidation, "you weren't going to use fire." "No," said Rory Turnbull. "I want the car to be discovered in a few weeks' time, after the fish have taken some of the flesh off the bodies." "Bodies?" she echoed softly. "I'm afraid, my dear Jude, you know too much to let you survive. Fortunately, there's been a rumour around that I might have another woman. Ted Crisp in the pub even suggested you and I might be an item. That's how it'll seem. The doomed love affair, the suicide pact, the only way they could be together. Which was, of course, why Rory Turnbull drove himself and his lover to their deaths off the sea wall at Fethering." The night was still and cold as the BMW stopped outside the yacht club gates. Rory Turnbull opened the lock with his member's key and edged the car forward till it was alongside one of the fishermen's chests. He leapt out, leaving the door ajar. Jude watched him as he opened and removed the padlock, reached into the chest, and heaved out the body of the late Sam Kent. For a moment he held the putrid flesh against his own body, almost as if it were a lover. Then he laid the body flat on the cement, and with both hands thrust the dead jaws apart. He reached inside his own mouth and removed his dental plate. Then he fixed it inside the dead man's mouth. "What are you doing, Rory?" From the ladder to which he had been clinging, Ted Crisp rose over the side of the sea wall like an avenging fury. At the same time, Carole appeared from the shadows of the yacht club. As she went to free Jude from the BMW, Rory Turnbull launched himself ferociously at the landlord, elbows working like pistons. A wild punch caught Ted Crisp on the tip of the chin and sent him flying. Then the dentist rushed to pick up his precious body. Carole and Jude watched in amazement as he jammed the corpse into the front seat, slammed the door shut, and hurried round to the other side. "You're mad, Rory!" shouted Jude. "You'll never get away with it." "Yes, I will," he shrieked back. "I've got it all planned out." The BMW shot off fast down the quayside road. Far too fast. Rory Turnbull misjudged the corner and bounced off a concrete bollard. The BMW spun crazily before smashing into the Second World War mine that was used as a charity collecting box. With the impact, the car burst into flames. "The ironical thing is," said Ted Crisp, "that because Rory died in a car crash, rather than an apparent suicide, Barbara will actually benefit from his insurance policies." "And presumably inherit the money he'd salted away," said Jude. "Except," Carole pointed out, "all that money is in accounts he'd opened using Sam Kent's name." "Does that mean the Kents will benefit?" said Jude eagerly. "Afraid not. The accounts would have been set up illegally. I'm sure it'll all go back to Barbara in the end." Ted Crisp shook his shaggy head. "Whole thing'll take some sorting out. Have you seen Maggie again, Jude?" "I dropped in this afternoon. Well, it's going to be tough, but she'll come through it." "And Nick?" Oh, he's being brilliant. He's a good, bright boy. Whatever else all this has done, it's certainly brought those two closer together." They fell quiet. A week or so had passed since the dramatic events on the sea wall. Carole was wearing her freshly cleaned Burberry, and was delighted that the dry cleaning had not affected its waterproof qualities at all. The three of them had been alone in the bar since Bill Chilcott had finished his customary half and gone home to the little woman. "What we all need is another drink," said Ted. "Landlord's treat again." "Large white wine for me, please," said Jude. Carole looked at her watch. "No thanks, Ted. Better get back. I'm expecting a phone call." "If you're not there, they'll call back some other time, won't they?" Jude grinned one of her big, easy grins. Carole was torn. There was no phone call she was expecting. All that lay ahead was an evening of watching television with Gulliver.
Come on, Carole. Like I said, landlord's treat. Large white wine, isn't it?
Oh, very well, Ted.
She sank back into her seat. Thank you very much. Of course, Carole Seddon would never be a natural pub person, but it didn't do any harm to behave against character, just once in a while.